There we go. Everyone can see it? Christopher the Ogre Kaloger, it's over. This is a book I had needed and wanted to write for many, many years. Over 10 years, over 10, 15 years, I have had this need to write the truth of colonization and occupation of lands here in the Americas, and all the consequences and repercussions of that as we see them today. I dedicate this book, I wrote this book for all of the children of the Americas. And thank you so much for allowing me to share it with you today. It has been beautifully illustrated by Victor Zúñiga Muro out of Los Angeles, and it has been translated by the amazing Matthew Byrne. I naturally write in Spanish. I have been unable to write in English yet. And so this book, as my first book, came out in Spanish. I wrote it in Spanish, but only the English edition has come out. The Spanish edition will be out in January, hopefully, 2022. So thank you. I will get started. More than 500 years ago, across the wide ocean A, there lived a king and a queen, so greedy were they. Ogreland is what their home was called, right by the sea. Oh, they hoarded everything there as far as the eye could see. Rivers and land and gold shore to shore, mountains and cows, yet they wanted much more. This is not half enough, they'd huff and they'd hum, and they wouldn't be happy till they owned every last crumb. To take and to take, each day more and more, they had 100 ogres to go steal and explore. With their big, huge arms, they'd hoard everything. These ogres snatched birds, flying free with the wind. And just as expected, the day finally arrived when those greedy kings' well ran completely dry. No more land or animals left for them to take, not even a flake of old yucky fruit cake. But then a thought occurred to those wicked kings. Why don't we just go steal other people's things? To faraway lands, that's where our ogres must go. Why we're just thinking of this, we simply don't know. And to head this big job, the kings would now choose their most trusty ogre. So they asked themselves, who? But the answer was easy. A minute it took. They knew just the ogre who would make history books. Dun, 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 dun. We've made our decision, the evil kings roared. He's the biggest, the baddest, by all ogres adored. He's ambitious and malicious, just totally vicious, ruthless and heartless and savagely capricious. Christopher Kaloger, we kings do choose you. There just isn't an ogre that steals like you do. Go to faraway lands and bring us more gold. We want more of everything, land, clouds, birds, lots more. We know they've got riches and treasure galore. So in the name of our Lord, we choose you to explore. The ogre Kaloger, in the blink of an eye, set sail for new land, didn't even ask why. He always craved stardom, and this was his chance. I'll be famous, he shrieked with a song and a dance. And with 100 ogres, Kaloger sailed Ocean A. So much sea, it was so grueling that he barked all the way. Until finally, one day in October, they could not believe their eyes. What a surprise it was. They had reached paradise. Beautiful clouds, mountains so grand, jewelry gold, architecture well planned, majestic big jaguars and birds in the sky, full markets and rivers. What beauty, oh my. There, millions of children ran free like the breeze. playing so happy right next to the sea. Ogre blinked twice, his eyes opened wide. My eyes must be tricking me, they're going side to side. I just can't believe it. Could this be all true? I'd rather not think it, I've got work to do. I'll steal until I can't anymore. I'll be famous, he screeched. You will not ignore. The ogre Ogre read his first ogre command and began to speak with a swish of his hand. From this moment on, you'll do as I say. Get used to it, kids, because I'm here to stay. You'll all work for me and you'll do it for free. You'll bow to my ways. This is how things will now be. Give me all of your gold, your mountains, your cakes, your clouds and your books and all of your lakes. Everything here by decree is now mine. My kings handpicked me, so it's my time to shine. And listen, you Abjayalans, and heed my advice, or you'll be quite sorry. I won't say it twice. You must learn my language and worship my kings, because henceforth I pull all of the strings. I'm Christopher the Ogre Ogre. I'll be famous one day. They'll say I was great in every which way. I'll make books say I was perfect, even my ugliest tooth, because from here on out, I prohibit you telling the truth. I need to make sure that from each pair of lips comes only a great story of my 3 big ships. Anyone who dare call me an ogre instead will regret it when I scream, off with his head. The children and parents of Abjayala were steaming. If you think we'll obey, you must be daydreaming. And to defend Mama Earth, they knew what was right. So the children put up the greatest of fights. They didn't want ogres stealing their land, but ogres were mean and chose to expand. Oh, and how sad the scene was. Ogre's crew brought guns, rifles, and sickness. Children and parents now suffered great illness. Millions of Abjayalans fell to the ground, and the emptiness made the most saddening sound of loss. But those awful ogres, they felt no remorse about what they did, a pure show of force. Now we can see how Ogre began to loot Abjayala, his original plan. His dastardly ogres had all come prepared to take all they could, nothing was spared. They put jaguars and mountains with all of the gold in dirty great ships to later be sold. They looted the rivers and took every bird. They burnt all their great books. It was completely absurd. I give you my word, I'm honest and true. Believe what I say, unlike you know who. Ogres took children's smiles, their grandparents' styles, the breeze of the sea and the birds over water like the wind flying free. Truth be told, so much beauty Abjayala had to its name that Ogre decided he needed more arms to lay claim. And so he yelled, bring me more people, more girls and more boys, and force them to work for me at my employ. And ogres went in no time to where they committed another unforgivable crime. Africa the Beautiful was the name of the land. For it, another horrible fate the ogres had planned. From there to Abjayala, they took children in big ugly ships, held captive in chains round all of their hips. Such was how, despite the children's bravery, these ogres put millions of them in slavery. The story of Ogre has not often been heard, but I'm telling the truth, this really occurred. If you've never heard it, please do not despair. It's because Christopher Ogre made truth something you couldn't declare. He made sure every book would spread these tall tales that the greatest admiral he was, an explorer who sails the great ocean blue and from Genoa hails. So over the years, people came to believe he discovered new land. Millions he deceived. They thought of him brave. He had such daring to do. They called him bold and super smart too. 'Twas all a big lie. He was none of these things. Sorry, Cologre, the truth sometimes stings. Discovering a place, what a doofus he was. You know what they say, silly is as silly does. 100 million people in Abjayala already existed over thousands of years. They had beautifully persisted. It's been about 500 years since that day in mid-fall, when Cologre usurped Abjayala once and for all. And though the ogre Cologre isn't around anymore, his fibs and his lies remain like before. But listen, dear children, because in this story I tell, wonderful things do happen as well. Well, back then, in May, while Cologre looked away, a wise, bean-eating grandma did something bold, you could say. She climbed the highest mountain many believed was uncrossable. This amazing grandma, oh, she sure did the impossible. I ate lots of beans for my power and might. This abuelita laughed in total delight. That ogre Cologre won't find us up here. If we stick together, we'll be in the clear. She took 7 children and puppies with her to that lush and green mountain. Oh, so happy they were. A big ceiba covered them, and so they bravely climbed, feeling safe in that refuge, paying ogres no mind. Inside little caves, they laid out their cots and grew their own food on fertile dirt plots. Yucca and plantain and rows 2 by 2, and corn of all colors from yellow to blue. Tomato, avocado, and chocolate too. They planted beans and legumes in patches yards long. This nourishing food meant they'd all grow strong. Chickens visited too, and hens that laid the more exquisite eggs, AAA grade. All the while, the children never ever forgot to share fair and square as Cologre had not. In this mountain, happiness shone like a sparkling jewel, because together they fought Cologre's cruel rule. And every night, when the sun went down, the children set off in a group towards town. Following maps they had carefully made, to Ogreland they went on quiet crusades to bring children their freedom, which Cologre forbade. They walked and they ran under cover of night. The moon and the stars lent them all of their light. They crossed the ogres' plantations on paths unpaved to free all the children Cologre enslaved. And when they'd arrived, they whispered real low, wake up, there's no time for sleeping. We're getting you out, but the ogres are creeping. We have to act fast for our plan to take shape, because the night is short and you have to escape. Well, would you believe it? Rescue after rescue, their numbers grew large. They called this resistance, with Abuelita in charge. There were no longer 7 or even 10 or 11. Now there were hundreds of children in Abuelita's safe haven. And in this one mountain, they made fires galore. They danced without fear and spoke their languages once more. Because every morning, as the sun shone bright, the Abuelita, an old woman now losing her sight, shared stories with them to their great delight about Africa the beautiful, so they would never forget and honor Abjayala as their destinies met. She spoke of where they came from, where their roots reside, and the catchy cool songs they all carry deep inside. This Abuelita taught them dances with pride and the immense knowledge the ancestors provide. This superb grandma, her knowledge she shared. Everything she knew of this world, no one compared. But life can be tricky. It doesn't always go right. When fighting the good fight, things aren't always so bright. One day, on accident, the children let slip a delicious smell that made Cologre's mouth drip. It was the smell of the Abuelita deliciously cooking, and after that wonderful aroma, the ogres came looking. And when the ogres came running over the hill, the Abuelita's heart began to grow ill. Boom, boom, it sounded. Boom, boom, her heart pounded. So the abuelita called them and soon they all surrounded. Listen to me, children. Listen all the way through. I don't know how much more time I'll be here with you. So in case anything happens, there's one thing you must do. Our history, you must write it. Do not let Kologer steal the truth from us too. Kologer got furious, yelling, she'll pay the price, just as Abuelita finished giving her advice. But Kologer was too late. Before he could do harm, the children banded together and sounded the alarm. A gigantic smile soon appeared on each mouth because the ace up their sleeve was rumbling down south. A stinky, most potent, and deadly fart the children unleashed. And what a foul odor. 'Twas not a loud cough. It was more like a bomb that had just gone off. The children had stuffed themselves with soft, yummy beans to be at the ready like farting machines. And just as the children had carefully planned, 'twas a fart no ogre could ever withstand. Away ogres ran screaming like chickens and hens, never to return or to be heard from again. But with lots of kisses and a tear in each eye, the children bid the abuelita a bitter goodbye. Oh, but you best believe they followed her advice because they got down to writing without thinking it twice. The children soon put together a most fantastical book with ceiba tree bark. Just give it a look. Under the fiery flicker, writing felt right because as if by magic, their words just took flight. And they titled this book, The Forbidden History of Abjayala That the Ogre Christopher Kologer Does Not Want Anywhere Told. They then placed the book very deep inside the big ceiba tree as a safe place to hide, so that one day, the children agreed, someone frees Abjayala from Kologer's lies and gland-grabbing greed. But many, many years passed and no one arrived to look at their book, yet their hope survived. Tired they grew, however, of waiting so long, and as they got old, their hope grew faint, like the sound of a gong. And during that time, more ogres arrived to poor Abjayala, which barely survived. The ogres raised up gigantic, huge walls and divided the land, yet no one recalls. And Christopher Kologer, well, he died over there in a Oriel town without much fanfare, yet though he is gone, he remains to this day a hero to many, to my great dismay. The lies that he told and the yarns that he spun are still told as truth. They've not been undone. So much time passed. Days turned into years and we fast approached. Today it appears. Because just a few days ago, while you are now alive, the wind took a deep breath and counted to 5. On 5, the wind exhaled a strong breeze, whoosh, which gave a girl's rubber ball a powerful push. That ball was Rebeldita's, a fearless young girl whose sturdy stride is without compare. She runs lightning fast and jumps through the air with her dog Lolito, quite the powerful pair. Together they looked for her rubber ball, which rolled and rolled, bouncing over a wall. It rolled under the ceiba, no joke, I swear. The wind was so wise to carry it there. Lolito and Rebeldita looked up with glee. Wow, they exclaimed, what a beautiful tree. She reached for the ball, something caught her off guard, a shiny green leaf, its brightness unscarred. She took a quick peek and a branch brushed her cheek. Then the ceiba suddenly to Rebeldita began to speak. Rebeldita, the tree whispered, I have something for you deep in my hollow, kept safe out of view. You're fearless, I know, and we need your help now. For truth to be known, only you will know how. What's this? Rebeldita reached inside. And when she got it out, a book, the Ceiba replied. So you best believe Rebeldita opened it wide. Whoa, 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 it's so pretty. The coolest of letters and beautiful twist. This, I know, I just cannot resist. She took a deep breath and started to read, and each word so transformed her that she felt herself freed. From this great book she had in her hand, she learned she lived on occupied lands. I am Black and beautiful, native and grand. She learned too, plus words that allowed her mind to expand. Our existence is resistance. The prohibited book read, and in her heart, Rebeldita felt these magic words spread. She also learned the true name of the land she lives on, not the name the ogres gave it on maps they had drawn. Abjayala, pronounced Rebeldita. Abjayala, she whispered out loud. Abjayala, she yelled incredibly proud. She read every inch of the book, cover to cover. It had troves of knowledge for her to uncover. So much, in fact, she had to share with you that history needed to be rewritten anew. So Rebeldita decided to take a pen in her hand and write her own book, the one in your hands, because she knows that you do your best to honor the truth and lay Ogres' lies forever to rest. Everywhere, north, east, south, or west, as Abjayalans, your ancestors request, that you do it for them, that you do it for you, that you guard the truth, whatever your quest. Because there is still some time to love and embrace and make this world a more beautiful place. So go free Abjayala from ogre lies, no matter what their tricky disguise, because nobody can deny you your history and right to control your future and make it shine bright. There's a happy ending in this book, you see. You've got the truth now, you can now be free. And if you're real quiet, you'll be able to hear the children's laughter, rejoicing in glee. Rebeldita. Thank you.
What a joy to be able to hear you, Doctora.
Oh, thank you, Willie. And I just realized I did not charge my computer.
Oh, go charge it.
I need to go get the charger. Will you wait for me 1 second?
Yeah, we can wait for you 1 second. For the folks who have joined us in between that time, we're going to transition over to our Q&A.
Okay.
And our Q&A, we'll ask questions of the doctora, and then we can hear from her for a little bit. So feel free to drop those in either the Q&A function or the chat. Either one would work. And we're happy to see you in the audience. For those of you who weren't here at the beginning, my name is Willie Palomo. I work with Utah Humanities Center for the Book. And this event is a part of the Utah Humanities Book Festival. And I'm saying this for the recording of this, that for the recording, we're going to end up doing a shortened version of the reading that Doctora Siu just gave. And then we'll be able to include the conversation as well. And I got a lot of questions for Doctora Siu, so if you don't have any, then I'm happy to hog a bit of her time. But feel free to leave your comments and things like that. And if you would like to ask her your question via camera, I can go ahead and upgrade you to panelist. Just let me know in the chat. But for the most part, I'm just excited to see everybody here. We'll give Doctora Siu a little bit of time so that she can come back with a charged computer. Are we back?
We are back. Sorry about that.
Awesome. I'll go ahead and get us started with the questions.
Okay.
And I have a lot of them, and then we'll see how many trickle in from the audience.
Awesome.
Yeah, and I guess one of the things, there's a couple of things I wanted to talk to you about, but I think a lot of it, it like boils down to how you navigate racial identity, especially in your works, and how you self-identify yourself. So I was really fascinated by just your background. In particular, you identify as like Nawa, Pipil, Honduran, Salvadoran with Guatemalan heritage, and then even Chinese heritage. So I guess the two questions I wanted to begin with is, yes, what connections do you have to those native roots, especially the Pipil ones that you were identifying? And then the follow-up one to that would be like, how does your Chinese heritage play into the work, both as a scholar and also as a children's book author? I think when I think of your books, I see a very strong presence of the, Indigenous and the Black. But I'm just curious how that Chinese identity plays a part too, because Asian people have played a huge role in the Americas that, is also underspoken or undertold.
Sure thing. Well, part of the histories that does not get told to us or taught to us, right, the K through 12 and even in college, is the entire erasure of our indigenous backgrounds, our indigenous histories here in the Americas. And so one of the reasons why I, for example, and millions of others do not speak my native language is because of colonization, right? Mm-hmm. And even though 529 years have passed since the occupation of these lands began by Europeans, where we were forced to speak European languages, this was a violent we were forced to leave our cultures. We were forced to adapt to the ways in which they wanted to write us into the new history that they were writing and making. They burnt our books, right? I did not know until much later in life when I started reading about colonization and trying to understand it more and its deep impacts and consequences. No, little do we know, because we never get taught this anywhere in the K through 12, that there were more than 100 million people living in the Americas in 1492. Our cities all throughout the Americas were larger. Our populations, already living in cities, our populations were way larger than the entire European population. And only from 1492, however, to 1592, that was 100 years, we saw a decimation of more than 100 million people. That is what historian David Stannard calls the American Holocaust. No, we don't know this. Why do we not know this? It's not by accident that our children are not taught the history of the Americas from the perspectives of the Americas, of Abjayala, right? Which was one of the many names that we had for ourselves before Europeans came and called it America. And so to me, I was born and raised in Honduras, Central America. My mother is an orphan from the Pipil region of El Salvador, western part of El Salvador, where in 1932, the government of El Salvador aided, financed, helped by the United States government, massacred the remaining thousands of native Pipil population that still spoke their language. And that's why in El Salvador, Nahuatl Pipil is almost extinct. There is barely now an effort to try and attempt to save Nahuatl Pipil, which is a variation of Nahuatl, which comes from central Mexico, right, all the way into Nicaragua. But that's almost an extinct language. There's a reason for that. And there is a reason why we don't speak about these almost extinct languages, or many of them that are already extinct. And that's colonization, right? It's not something that happened a long time ago. It's continuing to happen in many ways. And one place where it operates all the time is in our educational system, in the fact that we don't get taught these. And so it's important to me that even though I do not speak my language, my Pipil language from my mother's side, it's important to me that we recognize that that is our heritage. And then the second part of your question, yes, my father is Chinese from Nicaragua. That's another story we don't often hear, right? When we talk about the history of the Americas, and it's the very, very massive Chinese immigration that happened all throughout the 1800s. It was not just here to the United States. It was actually more Chinese migrated to everywhere in Latin America than here. And so it's important because we often tend to not look at the complexities and at the richness of the multi-ethnic, the plural ethnic backgrounds that we have here in the Americas, no? And we use words or terms like Latina, Latinx, Latino. You know, those words are atrocious, those terms, those identities, because they entirely erase our indigenous backgrounds. They entirely erase other backgrounds that exist in the Americas. And those are all stories, right? The Chinese, Palestinians, there's a lot of Palestinians in Latin America, the Jewish community in Latin America, in all throughout the Americas. And so it's important that we recognize that these communities exist and that we're not one conglomerate of peoples that you can just brush off with one term like Latina, Latino, Latinx, no? We need to remind ourselves that we come from beautiful histories of not just migration, but here, resistances, no? The reason why you and I are having this conversation today is because our ancestors survived. And we get to talk about this today. And so to me, it's a responsibility to speak, to identify in that way, and to show it through my work. After I became a mom in 2013 to a Black child, Black and Indigenous and Chinese child, it became even more important to me to be able to produce books and literature where she could find her beautiful histories of resistance here in the Americas. And it's something that we hardly ever get to see in children's literature.
Thank you for that really generous answer, Doctora. I'm going to remind people you can drop questions in the chat or the Q&A, or you can let me hog with all my questions. You're still there, so I imagine you like those responses. And I guess I'm going to re-ask my second question, maybe a little sharper, just because I'm very curious just about the Chinese aspect, just because I do feel like that's a very, very like marginalized stories in a lot of Latin American thought and tradition, especially looking at it from like the Latino North American perspective. And I guess even if it's just sharing a little bit of your family's story about how those traditions continue to live on from China, or what that experience was like for y'all and how that's reflected in your work, is something I'm curious about.
Yeah, sure. So I grew up eating white rice every day with plantains. Like, it was a normal thing, you know, white rice and some Cantonese strong main dish with like black beans, or like a tortilla with queso and, you know, crema, you know, it's in the food, I think. But where I mostly saw that in my family unit growing up. However, I grew up speaking Spanish because I grew up in Honduras. My father, however, is the only one of his brothers who speaks Cantonese. Yet he didn't speak to us in Cantonese while growing up because we lived in Honduras, and he just spoke Spanish to us, no? My next book, I'm really excited about that next project, because that's where I hope to be able to bring in the diverse histories of migration into the Americas, but also this concept of what race is, no? And so looking forward to that third book. My Chinese heritage is not something that has come through in these first two books that I wrote, but I'm hoping to be able to talk about that and many other, or, you know, most migrations into the Americas in that third book.
My next question, and audience, I'll keep reminding you, you can drop in questions, but my next question is, I wanted to explore a little bit more your transition from being like a powerhouse scholar over in UCLA, I believe, over to children book writing, where I imagine one of those, if not lucrative, is enough so that you can stay afloat in LA. I don't know how much professors get paid in LA, but I hope it's enough to live in LA. It might not be. But you know, the transition over to children's book author, especially when you're pushing books that are for children of color, especially, and things like that, can be rather challenging. So I'm just curious, like, how have you made that transition work for you to follow this passion and this calling that you feel like you received?
Absolutely, I'm loving these questions. You know, after 14 years in the college classroom teaching ethnic studies, mostly in liberal arts institutions. Last, I was at LMU in Los Angeles. Before that, I was at the University of Puget Sound in the Seattle area. Prior to that, it was when I was at UCLA finishing the PhD. The more years I spent teaching, I came to the conclusion that my job as an educator of ethnic studies was not to teach, but it was mostly to undo learning. I was having to undo the learning that they had gone through the K through 12, because my college students were coming in with these very strong frameworks, right, of infiltrated by white settler colonialism. No, so the history of Columbus, right, the myth of discovery was very strong in their thinking. Not understanding the actual history of how the United States came to be as a country, right? We have this nice fairy tale story of beginnings of the United States, and that starts in 1776, in this very fairy tale history we get in college and in the K through 12, that's when the country begins. But no, the United States has a deeper history to that, and that starts in 1492, and that's the part that never gets taught. Or if it gets taught, it gets taught as a fairy tale, like the Columbus myth is an entire lie, the way it is taught, right? This idea of discovery is a way to erase the actualities that happened with the initial occupation, right? That continues to this day. And so, yeah, the more I taught college, the more I realized we need to rewrite. We need to offer books that offer foundations based not on lies or fairy tales or fairy tale notions or myths, but rather we really need to start speaking truths to our children, right? Because if children of color are always old enough to experience the impacts of racism in our societies, right? Why are white children not old enough to learn about it, right? Would we not be having such different experiences if we could all speak truth to one another and actually understand the experiences of peoples here in the United States from the actual roots? So many problems would not be happening today if we really started from the base and based on truth. And so I became a mom too in 2013, and that's, you know, she was coming home with the Columbus story. My niece came home with a Columbus story. I would read their history books. The language utilized to speak about the occupation and colonization was still apologetic language. And so it all happened that I grew up on the Columbus myth, not taught my histories. And so at some point there, like 2.5 years ago, I said, I need to write these books. And, you know, yes, I don't have my salary as I used to, but to me, this is the most writing for children of the Americas and decolonizing the fairy tale notions that we get taught is, to me, like the most important writing I could ever do with my life. I don't see me doing anything more important than this. So to me, it's a responsibility, you know, to write to my daughter and for all children of the Americas. So we have we have something to utilize. It's like an invitation, a platform to have these discussions with our students, That's how I see my books, a platform that can be used to invite the conversation, a tool.
That's beautiful answer. This is going to be my last question unless more people jump in. But I specifically wanted to ask you about your translation process. I see that you got a translator, and I'm asking because the first time I heard this work, it was actually in Spanish over at UCLA. And in Spanish, like, I know the English translation is beautiful, but the Spanish is absolutely like gorgeous in the way it like flows and rhythm wise. So I'm curious, how do you feel about the English translation versus the Spanish one? What was that process like for you? Yeah, what do you have to say about the translations?
I have the absolute honor of having had writer Matthew Byrne as a student when I was a professor up at the University of Puget Sound. And, after he graduated, he decided he wanted to go into writing, that he wanted to write more. And he has such an amazing talent with words, because as you see, I write rhymes. I write in rhymes. And so the challenge was, how am I going to find the person to be able to translate not just the content, but to do it in a way that keeps the rhythm and the rhymes. And I truly am incredibly lucky. And so our process is very beautiful. I've given him both my books, and he's come with a draft. And then we've worked on those drafts after that, and he's come after with a very polished ending to that. But it is an art in itself. People have no idea the amount of work that goes into children's books. People believe that it is minor literature, that it is easy literature, but on the contrary, children's lit is everything, because this is where children begin to see their worlds, to think of it, to see themselves or to not see themselves, right? And that's been the problem. That is the problem in the United States. If you look at the latest research coming out of the University of Wisconsin, today there are more books with animal characters in them than there are books with children of color characters in them. It's a big, impactful and important fact to know. What is that? Why is that? Our population starting in 2013 is mostly babies of color now being born in the United States. Yet, the experience for me when I started going to libraries in 2013 was I could not find books I wanted my daughter to read. I just couldn't, because the majority of books there centered the experience of white children, or showed children of color in various stereotypical ways, or secondary characters, or shallow characters, or characters with no real experiences that were engaging. And so I found that to be atrocious. I became frustrated by that experience of not finding books to read to my daughter that ruptured the settler imaginaries and all the borders, right? Class borders, gender borders. Oh my gosh, children's lit is so full of gender roles that come from patriarchy and colonization, and so we ended up reading a lot of science books or like math books. So she got into anatomy from very early on. Like she loves anatomy because of that. We read a lot of science books because I couldn't find books for her. Of course, there are many exceptions, and now more than before, but still those are the numbers, and so it's important that we create the spaces for authors of color to be able to express the experiences of children of color, because it's important for all children, right? It's important for children of color to understand the experience of what it is to be white, for white children, as much as it is important for white children to understand the experience of children of color. They will have a very beautiful foundation based on that, on how to understand one another and relate to one another, as well as to relate to Mama Earth, to our Earth, right? Often, so many times, that was another huge problem I found in children's books. The way that land or space was always so colonial. No, it's like you own space, you own the place where you're at. It was it was never questioned or challenged. The landscape of children's literature is incredibly colonialist.